They were not just movies, they were cinematic detonations. In the 1970s, a new wave of exploitation films shattered every boundary censorship, morality, and storytelling once protected. From female revenge to fascist horror, these films rewrote the rules and scarred pop culture forever. Welcome to Part 2. Prepare yourself, because these 15 films do not play fair. Number 15. The Last House on the Left, 1972. It started as a low-budget horror project and ended as a cultural nuclear bomb. The Last House on the Left was Wes Craven's directorial debut, and it shattered taboos most filmmakers were too scared to approach. Inspired loosely by The Virgin Spring, this brutal revenge story threw audiences into a world of teenage murder, torture, and retribution that felt horrifyingly real. The unpolished acting, grainy visuals, and chaotic pacing made it feel like you were watching a crime unfold, not a movie. What rewrote the rules was the sheer audacity to depict sexual violence and vengeance with such rawness. The villains are bumbling, yet terrifying. The parents are forced into primal retaliation, and the cops are laughably useless. It dared to strip away the distance between audience and horror. Critics called it depraved, but underground audiences called it truth. It faced bans across countries, yet became a cult sensation on bootlegs and midnight showings. This film set the tone for Grindhouse revenge tales of the 70s and beyond. Without it, films like I Spit on Your Grave or Saw would never have dared what they did. Last House did not flinch, and exploitation cinema changed forever because of it. Number 14. Pink Flamingos, 1972. There is no way to prepare anyone for Pink Flamingos. Written and directed by John Waters, it is a transgressive masterpiece that declared war on good taste. The plot follows Divine, an underground drag icon, battling a rival couple for the title of filthiest person alive. But that barely scratches the surface of what this film unleashes. There is cannibalism, incest, nudity, grotesque sexual acts, and a scene involving dog feces that infamously ends the film in utter shock. What made Pink Flamingos revolutionary was not just the content, but the intent. Waters weaponized absurdity to mock the norms of decency, art, and narrative. Shot in Baltimore on a tiny budget, the film embraced its trash aesthetic like armor. It was banned in countries labeled obscene by authorities and rejected by almost every mainstream outlet. Yet it thrived in underground theaters, midnight showings, and college campuses, where it ignited a counter-cultural movement. Exploitation cinema had always flirted with the grotesque, but Pink Flamingos made the grotesque its mission statement. It rewrote the rules by showing that cinema could be both politically subversive and disgustingly hilarious. It made filth a form of freedom. Number 13. Coffee, 1973. Coffee did not just star Pam Grier, it unleashed her as a cinematic force of nature. Directed by Jack Hill, this was the first major film where a black woman was the solo lead in an action exploitation film, and she did not hold back. Grier plays Coffee, a nurse-turned-vigilante who takes down a heroin syndicate responsible for her sister's overdose. Armed with a shotgun, seductive wit, and righteous fury, Coffee took no prisoners, and neither did the film. Coffee rewrote the rules in 3 explosive ways. First, it centered a powerful black woman not as a victim, but as a weapon. Second, it blended blaxploitation swagger with revenge, cinema creating a genre fusion that would dominate drive-ins. Third, it tackled real issues like drug epidemics, systemic racism, and corruption while delivering blood-soaked justice. Audiences were stunned, and studios took notice. Suddenly, black action heroines were bankable. Without Coffee, there would be no Foxy Brown, no Cleopatra Jones, and no Kill Bill. Coffee made exploitation empowering even when drenched in sleaze. It told Hollywood that representation could kick the door down shotgun in hand. Number 12. Thriller, A Cruel Picture, 1973. Before Kill Bill and the wave of female revenge thrillers, there was Thriller, A Cruel Picture. This Swedish exploitation juggernaut, also known as They Call Her One Eye, redefined what cinematic brutality could look like. Directed by Bo Arnvibenius, the film tells the story of a mute young woman named Frigga who is abducted, forced into heroin addiction, and turned into a sex slave. But the second half flips the script. She trains in martial arts, firearms, and driving before launching a meticulously violent revenge campaign. What made this film so rule-breaking was not just its plot, but its technique. It featured real scenes of explicit adult content spliced into the narrative, making it one of the earliest hybrid films between pornography and mainstream cinema. The slow-motion gunfights were later mimicked by Tarantino, and the cold color palettes gave it an Artouse edge. The violence was not stylized for comfort. It was harsh, disorienting, and relentless. Thriller became banned in several countries and heavily censored elsewhere, but for those who saw it uncut, it was unforgettable. This film challenged the limits of what exploitation could be. It was not fun, campy, or goofy. It was grim, feminist, and shockingly modern in how it portrayed trauma and vengeance. Thriller: A Cruel Picture proved that even the most brutal films could carry an emotional weight and stylistic innovation. It did not want to entertain. It wanted to scar, and in doing so, it carved its own path into cinematic history. Number 11. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, 1974. This was not just a horror film. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre was a cultural reckoning. Directed by Tobe Hooper and filmed with a tiny budget in the blistering Texas heat, it told the story of a group of young people who fall victim to a cannibalistic family in the rural backwoods. But it was more than just a slasher. It was a howl of rage at America's crumbling ideals in the post-Vietnam and post-Manson era. What made it revolutionary was its illusion. People swore they saw buckets of gore, but most of the horror was psychological. Hooper used documentary-style camera work, high-pitched sound design, and disturbing realism to create an atmosphere of total dread. Leatherface was not a monster. He was a product of isolation, family dysfunction, and industrial collapse. The dinner scene alone rewrote the rules of what a climax could be. It was not action. It was pure anxiety. This film redefined terror and exploitation in one blow. It influenced everything from Halloween to the Blair Witch Project. It proved that fear did not need polish or money. It needed nerve. It became a cult, hit a banned item, and later a respected artifact of American horror. It blurred the line between drive-in trash and art house horror. Texas Chainsaw did not just break the rules. It built a new genre blueprint soaked in sweat, screams, and gasoline. Number 10. Ilsa, She-Wolf of the SS, 1975. No film pushed the exploitation envelope further into pure provocation than Ilsa, She-Wolf of the SS. Directed by Don Edmonds and financed by a Canadian studio, this shocker imagined a Nazi prison camp ruled by a sadistic warden named Ilsa, who performs grotesque experiments on female inmates. Diane Thorne played the titular character with icy conviction, becoming one of the most infamous faces in Grindhouse cinema. This film broke every rule imaginable. It combined softcore erotica with torture porn wrapped in a World War II setting that dared to touch taboos most filmmakers avoided at all cost. It featured nudity, violence, and sexual cruelty at levels so extreme that it was banned or cut in nearly every country. Yet it sold tickets like wildfire in underground theaters. Audiences were shocked, but they kept coming back. What made Ilsa a rule-rewriting landmark was its total commitment to outrage. It was not subtle. It was not apologetic. It presented exploitation as the main event. And in doing so, it spawned an entire subgenre known as Nazi-sploitation. The character of Ilsa returned in multiple sequels across different settings, always bringing cruelty with a sneer. Feminist critics still debate whether it was empowering or degrading, but its cultural footprint is undeniable. Ilsa, She-Wolf of the SS did not ask for permission. It bulldozed its way into cinematic infamy and never looked back. Number 9. Switchblade Sisters, 1975. Switchblade Sisters may look like a typical gang film on the surface, but underneath its grindhouse violence and outrageous characters lies a razor-sharp political allegory. Directed by Jack Hill, who also launched Pam Grier's career, the film follows Maggie, a teenage girl who joins a female gang called the Daggerdebs. After a brutal betrayal, she rises to power and turns the gang into an all-girl militia, challenging male gangs, corrupt cops, and even the school system. What rewrote the rules here was not just the gender flip, but the unapologetic tone. This was no exploitation film that snuck in feminism by accident. It wore it like a leather jacket. The film dives into sexual politics, class warfare, and betrayal, all wrapped in shootouts, catfights, and prison break. Its theatrical dialogue and comic book pacing give it an operatic quality that elevates it above most gang pictures of its time. Though dismissed upon release, it became a cult icon decades later, especially after Quentin Tarantino reissued it through his Rolling Thunder Pictures label. Tarantino called it one of the best female action films ever made, and its influence can be felt in everything from Kill Bill to Birds of Prey. Switchblade Sisters proved that Grindhouse cinema could be radically feminist, wildly entertaining, and narratively bold all at the same time. It took the rules of gang exploitation, tore them apart, and spray-painted revolution across every frame. Number 8. Sal, or the 120 Days of Sodom, 1975. Pier Paolo Pasolini's final film is not just an exploitation movie, it is a philosophical scream. Salo, or the 120 Days of Sodom, adapted from the Marquis de Sade, sets its horrors in fascist Italy. 4 wealthy men kidnap 18 youths and subject them to physical, psychological, and sexual torture in a manor house for 4 months. There is no hope, no heroes, no escape, only compliant submission and despair. What made Salo rewrite every cinematic rule was its blend of high art and unspeakable degradation. It was not meant to entertain. It was a statement against fascism, consumerism, and authoritarianism. The acts portrayed on screen are vile, yet meticulously composed. Every scene drips with symbolism. Every frame reflects Pasolini's intellectual rage. The film was banned in multiple countries, and Pasolini was murdered shortly before its release. Salo forced critics and audiences to confront a terrifying truth. That exploitation could be used not just for shock but for indictment. It weaponized revulsion and layered it with critique. Even now it divides viewers. Some call it genius, others call it depraved, but no one forgets it. Salo broke the final barrier between cinema and suffering. It challenged whether we could witness horror without flinching and whether we should. It remains one of the most controversial films in history, and the rules it burned down have never been rebuilt. Number 7. Squirm, 1976. At first glance, Squirm looks like your typical creature feature. But beneath its wriggling surface lies one of the most influential eco-horror films of the decade. Directed by Jeff Lieberman, Squirm tells the tale of a small Georgia town where a massive rainstorm knocks down power lines, electrifying the soil and driving thousands of bloodthirsty worms to the surface. What follows is not just a survival story. It is a visceral nightmare about nature turning against humanity. What made Squirm stand out and rewrite rules was its commitment to practical effects and grotesque realism. Real worms were used in many scenes, creating a physical discomfort that CGI could never replicate. The film's pacing was methodical. It built dread from small infestations to full-scale biological revolt. Squirm was one of the first films to truly explore the terror of insects and worms in a serious tone, paving the way for movies like Slugs, Arachnophobia, and The Bay. The movie also delivered a regional southern horror atmosphere rarely seen outside of Deliverance. Squirm did not rely on nuclear monsters or supernatural curses. Its terror came from electricity worms and mud. Simple things, but it made those things feel apocalyptic. This was exploitation rooted in natural horror, and it showed how ordinary ecosystems could become the source of extraordinary fear. It might seem small next to slashers or zombie flicks, but Squirm crawled into the subconscious and changed the game from the ground up. Number 6. Eaten Alive, 1976. Before slasher films became standardized, and before Freddy Krueger haunted dreams, director Tobe Hooper unleashed another nightmare onto screens with Eaten Alive. Set in the swamps of rural Texas, the film follows a deranged hotel owner named Judd, who feeds his victims to a giant pet crocodile. The setting is grimy, the lighting is surreal, and the violence is so unrelenting it feels hallucinogenic. The film makes no attempt to anchor the viewer in reality. It wants to disorient you. Eaten Alive rewrote the rules by blurring the lines between horror and insanity. While most horror films still operated on some form of logic, Eaten Alive deliberately stripped away coherence. Characters appear and vanish. The dialogue is incoherent. The soundtrack screeches rather than scores. Hooper was not interested in a traditional narrative. He wanted to recreate madness and drop the audience into a fever dream of sweat, rot, and scream. It also marked one of the earliest screen appearances of Robert Englund, who would go on to become Freddy Krueger. His role as Buck is twisted and explosive, giving a hint of the grotesque charisma he would later perfect. Though the film was not a hit in its day, it later found a second life on VHS and midnight showings. Grindhouse fans appreciated its commitment to atmosphere and its willingness to throw storytelling rules in the gutter. Eaten Alive showed that horror could be unstable, surreal, and unhinged. It did not follow the blueprint. It spit on it and fed it to a reptile. In the world of exploitation, this was not just bold, it was deranged brilliance. Number 5. Rabid, 1977. David Cronenberg was already a rising name in body horror, but Rabid is where his twisted ideas fully infected mainstream genre cinema. The film follows Rose, a young woman who undergoes experimental surgery after a motorcycle crash and awakens with a phallic parasite under her armpit that feeds on human blood. As she spreads infection through her city, panic erupts and society begins to collapse. This is not just a vampire story, it is a pandemic of the flesh. What made Rabid revolutionary was how it fused science fiction, clinical horror, and exploitation thrills. This was not a distant alien plague. It was urban, clinical, and terrifyingly believable. Rabid pushed the boundaries of what female sexuality could represent on screen. Rose, played by adult film actress Marilyn Chambers, was both a victim and a vector. Her transformation raised questions about medicine, beauty, and bodily autonomy long before those themes hit mainstream film. Cronenberg used his cold, precise style to create a film that felt more like surgery than storytelling. Yet underneath the detached tone was a brutal critique of how society handles disease, fear, and women's bodies. Rabid's influence spread across decades, inspiring later horror about infection transformation and medical ethics. It showed that exploitation could be intellectual and that gross-out horror could carry profound meaning. Rabid did not just mutate the genre, it infected it and left it forever altered. Number 4. Rolling Thunder, 1977. Rolling Thunder arrived as a grenade tossed into the exploitation genre. Directed by John Flynn and written by Paul Schrader, the film follows Major Charles Rain, a Vietnam War veteran who returns home to a Texas town only to see his family slaughtered and his hand mutilated in a robbery. What follows is not traditional revenge. It is cold, methodical retribution by a man who has lost the ability to feel. What rewrote the rules was its emotionless approach to violence. Most revenge films were explosive, cathartic, and fiery. Rolling Thunder was quiet and emotionally dead. Rane does not scream or rage. He calmly sharpens his prosthetic hook and hunts down the men who destroyed his life. The violence, when it comes, is brutal but surgical. This stoic tone turned the revenge genre into something bleaker and more psychological. The film gained a reputation as a hidden classic and was praised by Quentin Tarantino, who named his distribution company after it. It explored PTSD long before mainstream cinema acknowledged it, and it challenged the heroic veteran archetype. Rane was not a savior. He was shattered, and the system he returned to offered nothing but alienation. Rolling Thunder was too dark for major studios and too intelligent for Grindhouse, but it ended up reshaping both. It taught filmmakers that vengeance could be clinical, that trauma had no easy resolution, and that some heroes did not heal. They just reload. Number 3. I Spit on Your Grave, 1978. Few films in the exploitation genre ignited more fury, debate, and censorship than I Spit on Your Grave. Originally released under the title Day of the Woman, this shocking revenge thriller directed by Mir Zarchi follows Jennifer, a writer who is brutally gang-raped by a group of local men. After surviving the assault, she systematically hunts down and kills each of her attackers without mercy or remorse. The violence is graphic, but what truly disturbed audiences was the lack of filter or redemption. This film rewrote the rules by making its vengeance absolute. There was no sidekick, no police rescue, no last-minute reprieve. Jennifer was alone, and so were we as viewers. The rape scene lasts over 20 minutes and was condemned as pornographic by many critics. Roger Ebert famously called it vile and irresponsible. Feminist groups protested it across America. But underground fans and later scholars argued it was subversively feminist, forcing viewers to confront violence against women without gloss or glamour. I Spit on Your Grave was banned in several countries and heavily edited in others, yet it became a cult classic. It spawned remakes, sequels, and a long legacy of revenge horror. Unlike stylized action films that turned revenge into entertainment, this film dared to show revenge as ugly, slow, and personal. It proved that exploitation could push moral and emotional boundaries that most studios feared to touch. Whether praised or hated, its impact is permanent. Number 2. The Boys from Brazil, 1978. When legendary actors like Gregory Peck and Laurence Olivier sign on to an exploitation-flavored thriller, you know something is shifting. The Boys from Brazil, directed by Franklin J. Schaffner, may not look like an exploitation film at first glance, but beneath its prestige cast and polished production lies a disturbing core. It follows Nazi hunter Ezra Lieberman as he uncovers a bizarre plan by Josef Mengele to clone Adolf Hitler and raise the boys under identical conditions to recreate the Führer. What made this film rule-breaking was its fusion of pulp science fiction and historical horror with serious acting and high production value. It took what would normally be the plot of a B-movie and delivered it with Oscar winners and epic orchestration. Peck played Mengele with chilling charisma. The cloning subplot was ahead of its time and genuinely unsettling. It suggested that evil could be reborn not through magic or possession, but through cold science and nurture. The Boys from Brazil pushed mainstream audiences into concepts they were not ready for: eugenics, bioengineering, trauma replication. It used a Grindhouse premise to challenge moral philosophy and political ethics. It blurred the line between exploitation and prestige, proving that you could tackle extreme ideas without sacrificing cinematic quality. This film expanded the reach of exploitation into the world of highbrow drama. It was a Trojan horse of subversion dressed in awards bait clothing, and it opened the door for intelligent thrillers to explore taboo subjects with sophistication. Number 1. Cannibal Holocaust, 1979. There is no film in exploitation history more notorious, more banned, or more misunderstood than Cannibal Holocaust. Directed by Ruggero Deodato, this Italian horror nightmare was framed as a found footage documentary years before the Blair Witch Project. It follows a group of documentary filmmakers who vanish in the Amazon, and the footage recovered reveals their horrific fate at the hands of indigenous cannibals. But the true horror is not the tribe. It is the filmmakers themselves. Cannibal Holocaust rewrote the rules by blending real animal killings, fake newsreel footage, and savage gore into a horrifyingly realistic presentation. It was so convincing that Deodato was arrested in Italy on suspicion of murder. He had to prove in court that the actors were alive and the killings were staged. Meanwhile, critics around the world called it obscene, and it was banned in over 50 countries. But behind its brutality lies a scathing critique of Western media exploitation. The so-called civilized documentarians stage atrocities to make their footage more shocking, revealing the savagery of modern man. It flipped the lens of colonial horror back onto the viewer. It made audiences complicit. Cannibal Holocaust showed that exploitation could go beyond thrill into philosophical horror. It exposed the ethics of filmmaking itself. It was dangerous cinema in every sense, and it forever redefined the boundaries of what could be shown and why. It was not just a film, it was a dare. These 15 films from the 70s did more than shock. They redefined the battlefield. Whether through feminist vengeance, biological terror, or moral provocations, they carved new scars into cinema. Some were banned, some were buried, but all rewrote the rules. Like and subscribe for Part 3, where even more forbidden films will rise from the Grindhouse graveyard to challenge your sanity and your screen.